and welcome to another episode of the Code and Pixels podcast. My name is Kelly, and I'm joined once again by my awesome co-host, Ada Kunle. Who are we talking to today?
Hey Kelly, we joined today by Donna Vitan. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this.
Cool. Well, yeah. Um, let's start with the easy question. Uh, we all know that you work at TELUS, but can you tell us about your role and what you do over there?
Okay, so TELUS Digital is one of the largest technology companies in Canada, and we're commonly, uh, a lot of Canadians know us for our mobile plans, services, home services, that kind of stuff. Um, but we do have other products that maybe people don't know about, kind of like agriculture or, TELUS Health Services, that kind of stuff. So there's a whole part of the organization that people don't know. But one of the things that I'm responsible for is the design system for the marketing face of the TELUS product.
Cool. I'm curious, like, what is the makeup of the design system team over there?
So for us, we're actually a really, really small team. Um, we've got me as the design lead, and we've also got another designer helping with us on the design side. And then we've got a solutions architect, which helps, kind of like plan the bigger structure and foundation of the design system. We've got a tech lead and about 3 other developers, and we've got a PO to help kind of manage our stakeholders and our priorities and our roadmaps kind of stuff.
Oh wow, actually that's a huge team. Um,
It's
so
huge. It's pretty.
um,
Okay.
no, because like some people I've been in teams where just me and myself. So uh, it's always good to kind of see teams that have like multiple, like especially having a product owner. I think that's something that's like super useful. Um, uh, Another question I have is like more talking about your like some of the challenges you face at TELUS. So what are the current challenges you're facing right now?
Right. I feel like a lot of the challenges that we're facing right now is that like TELUS is such a big organization. It has multiple products, but the design system was really born to support like a single brand, a single product. And we're trying to kind of how do we scale the design system to help support other products and other brands? And also, again, to me, I felt like our team was small because there's such a huge need from the organization that it's like, oh, we can't do all the things that we want to do to help support the organization. So like we have to like focus on certain things. And so the challenge really I feel right now is kind of growing from a single brand to multi-brand, but also there's this assumption that when once you start to go to multi-brand, there's this assumption that you can swap between brands, that it's so like, oh yeah, you just theme it. Oh, like everyone always points to like material UI. It's like, oh, just change the colors and that kind of stuff.
That's like the story of my life is like why can't we just use the material? And I'm like, I have to go through the whole I feel bring out like my whole conference talk about like why, it isn't that easy. Um, but before you get into that, let's take a step back and talk about like your career journey. So can you briefly walk us through your career and the different types of roles you had in the past?
Um, I suppose I feel like I guess it all feels looking back that it all led up to this. My career started with maybe some Sailor Moon and Hello Kitty and GeoCities in the library, and that's something I really wanted to. I really like art, but that's when technology was coming up, and so I really like that. But I did go into graphic design school, and in graphic design, it was mostly like print. And then you have like one session on like web design. And that's when you get into like Dreamweaver was coming up. So that was really fun. And actually, when I joined a small agency, it was mostly like a print agency. And then it's like, oh, you do web design too? Like, okay, so now you're leading the website of it. It's like, oh yeah, you can do HTML. Like, okay, so you go ahead and do all those. And that also led me to like my next step, which is joining like a big financial company, one of the top like three banks in Canada. Um, and then that's actually after that, that's when I joined TELUS Digital. And when I did the interview process, and again, it was for a design system design role. And one of the things that I really remember about this interview process is like, oh, are you ready to like repeat yourself? Are you like, do you like documentation? Do you like writing that? Like, and I'm just like, I was just like, "Oh, yeah, I'm so excited, like, I can't wait." Like, I do like writing things, and I just remember, like, they kept repeating at the end, like, "Are you sure?" Like, it is boring work if you really think about it because, well, you're just making libraries and, you know, branding buttons again. But I think you take the boring out
Ooh,
of
I
the
like
work
that.
for other
Take the
people.
brain out of the work for other people. Right. That's a good slogan. And also, that's kind of weird that like they kept on saying, "Do you like to repeat yourself?" Sounds like a test, but um, uh, I digress. But let's get into more of the work you've been doing at TELUS. Can you talk a little bit about like how many products the design system supports, and 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 then how do you work with teams, if that makes sense?
Right. So part of like the evolution of our design system again was focused on like a single brand. And even though it was a single brand, it was actually a really big team because we have different products and services that we offer, like home internet, streaming, TV, and then we also have home security. So you've got like all these little teams that still kind of independently and isolate, like work in isolation. And so they're like, "Oh, I'm doing internet. I have a specific look and I have a specific pattern." And then I'm doing like mobility. I have my so all these teams were kind of doing their work. They follow the brand guidelines, but they're still creating like unique stuff to themselves. And so from the design system perspective, it's like, okay, you could do your own patterns, your own like recipes, but here's like, the same stuff you use all the time. So like the agnostic little pieces. And it's like, maybe you contribute it. Maybe, we have community contributions, that kind of stuff. And community contribution is such a loaded thing because, oh my God, when we started, right, like, here's a library, here's the agnostic library. And like, oh, we can't support it. Like, we can only, what do you want us to do? Keep growing components, 200 components, 300 components? How many components are enough for the library? Um, so I'm trying to get back to the big challenge of like community contribution. And I was a big proponent of like, hey, we have to talk to the people, we have to communicate, collaborate, we have to like, level up people's understanding of the design system so that they can contribute. And it's like, it's a lot of work because designers, like UX designers, visual designers, UX researchers, they have like an expertise, they have things that they focus on. Like, why am I educating them on like, hey, have you done the interactive state, the disabled state? Did you know like what's the hover focus? And it's just like a back and forth can take such a long time. It can take 2 months, 3 months, and like that. Then you get nowhere, right?
Yeah, that's interesting because like I think usually when you have design system, you have like one customer, but now I think in your case you have like multiple customers and you got to kind of keep everyone happy. Yeah, I'm wondering like what is like their approach for building components? Is it now in a case where instead of like the design system is in charge of all these components, um, do different brands or different products have their own components and they contribute back to the library? Um, just wondering what's that approach?
Yeah. Um, So when right now our design system enables multi-brand, and what that means is it's not hot swappable. Like you can't just here's a component and you can just like, oh, I'll choose to be TELUS, I'll choose to be Kudo, or I'll choose to be Public. Like we're not at that position yet, because what we try to do with, like, again, the introduction of design tokens and theming, like we built the foundation so that we have a design system team for TELUS, and then maybe Kudo will have a design system team for themselves. And the goal was, we could get all these different products, all these different brands to own their part of the design system, and we would just provide like the foundation and like the tutoring, that kind of stuff. But again, we get to that problem of like, why are we asking other teams to level up their knowledge and expectations when maybe they don't have time for that, they don't have the investment for that, they don't have the capacity, and they're asking us to like, hey, okay, what can we do now to help, because they clearly don't have capacity. The trade-off is you're not going to have a lot of customizability. You're not going to have all the things that you might want right away, right? In order to have a hot swapping theme, we're going to limit you to 3 variants of a button. We're going to limit you to like 5 different cards and 3 different ribbons. Like there's a trade-off for having ownership of like the whole product, and like, yeah, we'll give you we'll do all the work, don't worry about it, versus like, oh, you want all those things, here you go. Like, you want all that power, here you go. Like, so it it really depends on your
Yeah,
organization
that's
and
interesting.
how they
Reminds me of
want
the
to
Batman quote
give
of
that power.
"With great power comes great responsibility." Uh, so, um, and then it's also interesting since like you work with multiple product and teams. Like, how does the timelines like work together? So, the time of the design system compared to the needs of like a brand. Is it kind of a case where you work things prior to people need it, or is it a case of just like just build what's needed, like that's going to be more horizontal, and then like if someone needs something, they'll like build it, or maybe that's like help out. But I'm just wondering like what how those timelines work for you. Yeah. Um, I guess the question
Sorry,
was more
can
on the
you
lines of
repeat the
like,
last part?
is the timelines between the design system team compared to the needs of the brand that needs the component that work.
Yeah. So we're really like right now in a position where, you know, we've been working on the multi-brand design system for over a year, maybe 2 years. I think I've been talking about the multi-brand evolution. Um, but it's so strange because at the time where it's like when we started, we're like, we're gonna empower the different brands. Like you're gonna have this design system and you're gonna own it and you're gonna build whatever variants you want and that kind of like stuff. And at that point, you're like, hey, that's great. We can't take that on, like, we're not ready to use you yet, right? And then now, like, over a year, and it's like, okay, well, these people don't want to own it yet. They're not ready. So, but there's these other products that, like, want to have the multi brand. They want to be, for example, like if you're a customer service rep, right? You you use the same service for all the different products. And so like, oh, I'm gonna, service a TELUS customer or a CUDA customer. Like it's still the same UI. You just want maybe a different visual on it. And so even though the brands themselves don't want to use the design system, there are need for a multi-brand design system. So that's when, it's up to our team to be like, okay, now we're going to take this ownership. Now we're going to own these variants, like, you get what you get. And so now a little bit after that, after we've proven like we can do this multi-brand stuff, now the brands are like, oh, you did that project. Or like, oh, okay, we want to do multi-brand too. Like, we're ready to come in and like, okay, great. Here's what we have. And then again, we'll work towards like customization. What does that look like? And so it's about meeting the challenge and the need at that time. And when I can feel like I jump everywhere, but to kind of get back, what you were asking was like, what does that timeline look like of like, hey, we need this thing. Can you build it for us? And I swear people have an assumption, and maybe it's our fault for kind of explaining like, oh yeah, you can have it in a sprint or two. But that's like, if that's just like a little change, if that's like you're not changing a component completely, like, yeah, we could get that because you know what I mean? Like, there's already stuff like on your board on that sprint. So the earliest I could get you is the next sprint, which was another 2 weeks. And then it's not done until 2 weeks after that. So that's just like a tiny change. So it really depends on the complexity of like the component. Is it a new variant?
Yeah, I can empathize with that because what starts off as just adjusting one thing snowballs into you're adjusting now 20 components, and it was all supposed to be one small request.
Mm-hmm.
So Donna, I wanted to talk to you about, you mentioned obviously supporting all these different brands. How do you organize documentation, or like how do you organize all these different overrides, or however you're theming these components across all these different brands?
I'm glad we're talking about this because that's like literally like my week today. Um, we we have a documentation site and it's built on Docusaurus. And what it's meant to do is kind of pull in the different themes, like so that it builds it automatically in documents. Like, so you have like the static pages, like getting started with design, getting started with development, news. And then you have a component page. And the component page is like, you have to choose your brand, and you have to choose, is it web only or is it multi-platform? And then based on that, it'll show you like the list of components for that. And that's specific to that brand and that platform. And people always like go in there like, oh, I want to switch brand. Like, oh, why? Like, I'm not swapping the page. Like, now I have to like restart. Like, so I know people want it to be easy, but it's not always easy. It's not like, here's a button, I'll just like tab between brands. But like, what can we do to make it easy? How can we make it clear that, maybe it's not swapping between the button brands, but like, yeah. So we're trying to, we have a ticket. I'm in sprint right now, trying to do that and trying to cl- clearly say, hey, you're in a component page and you're in the TELUS component page. Oh, okay. Now I switched to a different. You're on the Kudo component page. Little things like that maybe is like so obvious, but people need that. People need the obvious.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance between convenience, but also not confusing people. So that's a really interesting challenge that you're having to deal with. So you mentioned earlier Google material design, and a lot of people have this misconception of, oh, it's just pick your color and magically everything's all different. I wanted to ask you, obviously color is a big theming element, but what other things do brands typically ask to customize, and how do you go about kind of separating just like the basics of, oh, it's just your primary color, and these other nuanced things that people like to customize?
Yeah. Yep. So one of the things that the different brands have, right? Like each brand, like I have a custom color, I have a TELUS green, and I have Kudo teal, and I have a public apricot. That's the color, like the name of their color. But what we are standardizing is like, okay, well, that might be your brand color, but to us, it's primary. Like it has to be this agnostic thing that everybody can switch. And it's a little bit of like a mental model for the brand designers, because it's like, I am unique and I have 3 colors. And then another brand would be like, I have a rainbow of colors. And so it's like, I want all these colors. Like, well, in order to have standardization, in order to have multi-brand, you have to, you can have your colors, but you have to name primary, you have to name secondary. And that's what like material does, right? Like they have all those shades, and you can have accent, and that's what they have. But like, again, people will say, oh, I don't want all the colors of material, because like actually if you do material right, you get like hundreds of colors, whereas like, oh, I just want this set of colors, I don't want 10 shades of green, I only want 3 shades of green. Like, are you sure? Because you're gonna have hover, you're gonna have press. Like, no, these are the only 3. Like, okay, come back like in 2 weeks. So there's that standardization level, but then there's also another level where it's like, okay, you've standardized now, but I want additional themes. And so how do we get that? How do we enable? Because, we can't use your design system if we don't have all these other colors.
I think it's funny when we talk about different shades. How many shades do we need to support a product? And especially, you brought up a good point about state and other things that a lot of people, we're so focused on these displays, these static experiences, and then when we go into actually UI and interaction, it creates a whole color can of worms. So when your team is evangelizing the system and you're trying to support all these teams and brands, how do you go about evangelizing the system and kind of trying to make sure that folks are following the system, or at least attempting to follow the system? And how do you deal with maybe like one-offs or override?
Right. Yeah, this is probably the biggest challenge I had in the past. Is our design system was meant for, again, a single brand and a set of teams that are familiar with it. And so for the most part, they followed it. But here's the thing. If the organization, if leadership doesn't drive that adoption, doesn't say like, hey, you have to use this. And so there is really outreach in the different communities, and like, hey, we have a meeting, we'll tell you all the updates, tell us about what your needs are. So it was really, I feel like, really groundwork at that point, and kind of like, hey, we're also really very connected to the brand and the design community or practice or center of excellence, because we have guidance on like, this is the best way, this is the best usability and accessibility. Like that was really great for me. I really like driving that. I really like connecting with people. But we also had this challenge where, oh yeah, we had other teams that said, oh, yeah, we know they have a design system, but they don't have what we need. And like, we can only do so much as a design system team, that we really need the organization's help to drive that adoption. And which is really great. Of what's happening now is that there is more push from leadership to tell everybody like, hey, you're no longer allowed to build your own things. There is an actual thing. There's like an actual embargo now for the organization be like, you cannot build new components, you cannot build new features unless it's through the UDS team. And so like, yeah. But then also like, it's a reprieve. It's a reprieve because then we don't have to like build all these things right now. But it means it's a scramble for us to build our multi-brand stuff, build all those things, because when that embargo is gone, there's gonna be like a massive like, build this for us. You must now do all these things. But again, that only happened because leadership told everybody, like, you need to start using this because what you're doing is, duplication of effort, like all the money spent that your team is building these things. Why is your team building these things when there is an alternative? Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, the cards look kind of the same, but in this one, there's an
Yeah, I
extra
love it
bullet.
that like something that
And it's like,
leadership
well,
getting
again, it's
behind.
that bird's eye
I've been in
view to be
companies
able
where
to
they're
see
like,
why the
"What is a
different teams are
design
building
system?" And I'm
different
like,
things.
"It's not going to end up good." So that's super cool. Um, yeah. So to close out the episode, let's say like someone is trying to be just like you, a hybrid designer developer. What is the one piece of advice you would give them?
Dude, are designers even interested in doing code right now? If you're interested in the code part, I think the collaboration between the designer and developer is like the biggest thing, is right. Like, you don't have to learn it on your own as long as you kind of what Brad Frost and Dan Mull did in one of their talks, right? Like the hot potato, right? Don't like I finished the design like and just hand it off. It's just like let's work together and like, oh yeah, I have this question. Oh yeah, like what we're doing right now, which is really helping the speed of our team is the working sessions where it's like, hey, I'm not gonna comment on this, but let's huddle real quick right now. Or let's just sit together and we could do our work, but if we have questions, we can ask each other. It I think for me, if you're getting in as a designer getting into the code stuff, just if you start talking with your developer and
Yeah, I love that.
collaborating on that really
Yeah, I love
closely,
that
you
that
start
that
to pick up like, oh,
the
okay,
hot
that's what I
potato
should
metaphor
account
because I
for
think
in
it,
my
it
design
works
next
pretty
time.
well,
Oh, that's what
especially if
I
you're
should
trying to
look
learn
for.
be the
It's
designer
getting
code.
to know
Um,
the other parts,
cool.
the
Let's
mystery
say
meat of code
some of our
that
listeners
will really
want
help
to
you.
follow you. Where can they find you?
You can look for me in Donna Vitan. I'll be like, I'm still on Twitter. I haven't moved to like the new
I'm the same
stuff.
way. I'm
I
like,
just
I'm
am I
I'm super
getting
old
old that
school.
like I
So
can't
people are like,
be
oh,
an early
Mastodon. I'm like,
adopter? Like I'm not even
Mastodon.
an
So
early adopter. Like it's been out
but
like, you've got posts
cool.
now or two
Is there
posts.
anything
Like anyway, I'm
you
still on
want to
Twitter.
plug
I
that
still
you're
got my
working on the
Instagram.
side?
You could connect with me on LinkedIn. Okay, so, I would really invite everyone to kind of join and look up the Design Token Working Group, community group, because if you really want to be in the forefront of helping like establish what this new standard is going to be, like look up all our tickets and like provide your info, provide your use cases, because, this is the time for that to be part of, the recommendation. So I really welcome everybody to join that. As well, I'm part of the design systems community meetup group, which is kind of more of like local meetups. Right now, we're planning to do an in-person meetup, but right now we have an upcoming like virtual meetup. And so that's design systems dot community. And again, we look for local, like right now I'm in Toronto, and so we have a local chapter, and we've got a few chapters around the world as well. And this is,
Yeah,
like,
I totally
you
agree.
want to
I think
connect
I
in
went to my
person.
first
And I
meetup like a
really
couple weeks
love,
ago, and it
again,
was
the
like
online
super
community.
weird,
It's so
but it's
great.
also
Again, how
super cool
I
to
met
kind of
you
meet people
folks
in person.
and how I'm part of that. But
Cool. Well,
there's
Donna,
also
thanks
times where you
again
just
for
kind
being a
of want to
guest.
connect
Um,
locally.
thanks again for people that are listening. If you want to learn more about us, follow us on the social media in Code and Pixels FM, and then visit our site at codeandpixels.fm. So cool. and have a great rest of your day.